On today's podcast, we're discussing the reality of imminent terrorist attacks on America that will make 9/11 pale in comparison. The FBI, love them or hate them, are warning us that attacks on the homeland will happen over the next 12 months. The JTTF is predicting simultaneous cross-country attacks. Left-leaning and right-leaning media are both admitting that our heavily compromised southern border has allowed a large number of sleeper cells to gain an even stronger foothold in America than they already had. Keep watching this video to learn the steps you can take now to be better prepared. And we're back, and today we're joined by James from Pilgrim Ammo and Sal from USA Carry. Let's just jump right in here and establish the current situation as far as sleeper cells and terrorism in America is concerned. Sal, do you want to start?
Sure. So as far as this newly manifested threat, it's not necessarily anything new. There's significant intelligence to indicate that there's sleeper cells that have been in the country for years. In the past few years, however, with a wide open southern border, the possibility of having more and more such entities in the country is obvious. And you know, the whole spectrum of news outlets is admitting that. The FBI has said that this is now a top priority, and this is an FBI that we all know has been asleep at the wheel as far as looking at real threats in the past few years. Interestingly enough, I just heard one particular individual who's well up on these things say that many terror watch list suspects have actually been intercepted crossing the northern border as well. So just to throw that out there, right? We are certainly preoccupied with the southern border because that is simply where most of the volume comes. But, you know, our northern border is enormous, obviously, and it's not that well protected. It's just so vast, you know, and it's just something we kind of discount. So if they want to get here, they can get here. And the other thing I would mention about the groups that we're currently discussing, it's terror groups that have been our focus for the past, let's say, post 9/11 world, right? So when we talk about Hezbollah and Hamas, these are groups that have never had aspirations of worldwide terror as compared to Al-Qaeda or ISIS. In fact, those groups typically hate each other. Hezbollah fought extensively against ISIS, right? So Hezbollah and Hamas are both specifically groups that came to be rather to fight Israel specifically within the region. However, with the escalation of this current war, obviously those groups consider us a direct supporter, of course, of Israel. So the possibility that they would call in to activate cells that they have in wait as a flat-out act of war is certainly a possibility, right? So we're dealing with a different nature. It's a terror threat of a different nature at this point. With that said, I would encourage people not to discount the usual players, right? Even though ISIS and Al-Qaeda is greatly reduced compared to what they used to be, they're still out there as well.
I just wanted to qualify what you're saying, Sal. So NPR, you know, left-wing news outlet, even they covered Christopher Wray's testimony in late October regarding this subject when he was giving an update to Congress. And it lays it out pretty black and white terms that this is a legitimate threat to America. They know that there are sleeper cells here. When we published the first video after 10/7 and mentioned that there were active sleeper cells, there were some people suffering from complete dissonance from reality, stating that we were spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and that the people coming across the southern border were just coming here because they wanted to work and feed their families. And that's complete and utter bullshit. We've known that there have been terror cells here for decades. The FBI, love them or hate them, is now telling us straight up that these terror cells exist. They actually released a list a couple days ago and listed a whole bunch of major American cities that are kind of a high priority on Hezbollah and Hamas's list. So really what we're just got to establish right out of the gate with this video is it's not hyperbole. We're not spreading fear. This is the reality of the situation. James, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're very well traveled internationally. Give me your thoughts on terror cells, sleeper cells here in America.
I get how some people will think that you're spreading, you know, disinformation, but what you're doing is you're just giving your viewers the ability to have a think about what's going on. Some years ago, with some of the other stuff that I've been doing over the years. I was doing a debt recovery that actually took me to Iran. And I spent some time in Tehran and Bandar Abbas, Kish Island, things like that over from Dubai. And one of the things that I found really interesting over there is that a lot of the people that are there, that are locals, they all speak very, very good English, and most of them have been educated in the US. So, it's not a stretch of the imagination that, there are some people that could be wanting to harm America or Americans. It's that country's been under sanction since the Holy Alliance, or what they call the Holy Alliance. So, it's not a stretch of the imagination that there could be some people over here that are wanting to do harm to Americans. And it's not a stretch of the imagination that, that there are going to be people over here that could potentially want to harm you. And, as I've said many, many times on your show, chance favors the prepared. So, it is logical. There is a lot of information to support that this could potentially happen. So why not do the best by yourself and your family and prepare for it?
Just to go back to the FBI for a second, Chuck Calesto posted the list, and the FBI list on the top cities. I'm going to rip through it really quickly, but you're talking DC, San Francisco, Santa Clara, Los Angeles, San Diego, Houston, Arlington, Texas, which was home for me for many years, specifically because of Cowboy Stadium and the new Ranger Stadium beside. You could take out 200,000 people like that. Dallas, Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tampa, Boston, Playfield, Illinois. I'm not familiar with that area. Chicago, Cleveland, Ohio, Laurel, Maryland, Potomac, Sheraton, Virginia, Springfield, Virginia, Raleigh, Philadelphia, Charlotte, Detroit, Columbia, Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, Denver, Oklahoma City, Tucson, and Seattle. Those are cities that are likely to see a terrorist attack in the next 14 months, according to Christopher Wray and the FBI. But we've had some intelligence from other parties. We don't want to get anybody in trouble, but it basically said, yeah, sure, they'd love to pull off something huge like that. But in reality, probably what these sleeper cells will go after will be multiple sites simultaneously in smaller jurisdictions where there's not a large law enforcement presence. So in other words, taking somewhere, say in a small county, less than a couple 100,000 people, and hitting 10 or 12 schools simultaneously. They're going to lose one cell, because that's the only one that the law enforcement can respond to. But the next day they'll hit schools in another location. The next day they'll hit 8. And so the JTTF and the FBI, they've kind of done some mock-ups on this, and both of them came to the conclusion that 3 days of attacks like that, we would be into complete anarchy and chaos. Grocery stores have 3 days worth of food. People will be in an absolute panic, shooting each other. Rule of law gone.
Do you want premium ad-free content? Duh. Content that's not censored by big tech, of course. Well, with SD Insider, you can get behind the scenes and a whole lot more. Link in the description.
I think it's safe to say that anybody who doesn't have their head in the sand is aware that we face significant threats from sleeper cells in America. So that begs the question, what can people do?
The truth is, this is a new materializing threat that we're dealing with. But as far as what we should be doing is general preparedness that we should have been doing for many years overall. There's just some new nuances to think about. The first thing, obviously, that comes to mind is limit your time in big public locations with big crowds as much as possible. And again, that's not always possible. But the very first step, before we even get into your strategies and your plan for when you're at those places, don't be at places you don't have to be. I mean, if we're looking at a heightened threat potential for the next year or two, maybe just reduce how much time, especially if it's time with family and kids, in those locations. Maybe just plan to lock it down a bit for the next few months or couple of years, however long we're in this particular duration. I don't encourage people to run away from life. And there's the argument, oh, they already won if we do that. But, our number one priority has to be the life of our family, right? So if we're simply taking risks that we don't normally have to take, that would be where I encourage people to start. And beyond that, we're all big on the preparedness aspect. Are you prepared to hole up and not leave the house for a few months? I think Americans should be prepared to sustain in the home for a few months. And we all got a good taste of that coming out of COVID, right? All of a sudden, everybody's a prepper. The general public who laughed at preppers with stupid shows like Doomsday Prepper and all of that. Well,
Right.
everybody realized that you should have a few weeks, preferably a few months worth of supplies in the home. So, that's where I would start minimizing your exposure to places that may be targeted, and be prepared to hole up in the home for an indefinite period of time. Because if something really big happens, you're going to be under martial law. And even if you're not directly affected by the event itself, you may simply not be able to get around, and you don't want to be reliant on having to go to the grocery store at that point.
That should be the standard that everybody's doing. Everybody have a plan in place for yourself, have a plan in place for your family. But I mean, for someone like me, as you know, Chris, I'm doing about 3,000 miles a week, between the factory in Tennessee and where I live in Florida. My truck has got a lot of things in it, not just, ammunition and such, but, fridges and the ability to get from point A to point B, extra fuel, a whole lot of water, just in case something does lock down. I think we were talking earlier, Chris, with what happened in LA and that roadway being closed down with what happened recently. I mean, if I'm going down 75 trying to get home and then something's locked down and I've got to figure out a different way to get home, can't get to the next fuel source, like, what am I going to do next? So, the general preparedness, you've really got to look at what you're doing in life on a day-to-day basis and war game that out, not just the standard stuff.
Yeah, just to expand on that. So going from Tennessee to Florida and traversing Atlanta sucks at the best of times. So a good example, as far as I-75 is concerned, what's happened in California. So the LA freeway is closed. There was a homeless encampment, which was arson. It was set on fire, structurally damaged the freeway. 300,000 cars a day typically traverse that stretch of road, and it shut down. And now there's been a second one that just happened yesterday. So having contingencies to get home, absolutely critical. Sal, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to expand on that theme before we get into the particulars about this current threat, another thing that should be part of everybody's daily life, we've talked about being able to stay at home, a bug-in plan, being able to make it home if we're far away from home to begin with. The other thing is you need to have a bug-out plan, because no matter how remote or where you live, you may have to leave the house. This past summer, I had friends in the Rocky Mountains, like as remote as it gets. Colorado Rocky Mountains, they had to leave their homes because of the wildfires. So it really doesn't matter where you are. This is simply an added threat to consider now, that you may have to leave. What if something chemical is released? It could be a flipped over chemical train car, right? Like we saw not long ago. I want to say was that Pennsylvania or Ohio, wherever it was.
Ohio.
Any of these things, yeah, you need to have the plan to get the family in the vehicle and be out the door within a couple minutes. So do you have the bags packed? Do you have the weaponry packed, etc.?
I would add to that your choices are, if you do have to evac, you can become a ward of FEMA, a refugee of FEMA, or have a plan in place. And being a refugee under the care of FEMA is not a really palatable choice, in my opinion. I would go back to, Sal, what you were saying with regards to people having the ability to self-sustain for a minimum of 3 months. The intelligence is pretty clear that the bad guys will go after our electric grid and our water supply. And the water supply is everything from disrupting the flow of water to poisoning the water. And then from the poisoning perspective, there's been a major concern for many years that people haven't really talked at length on, but in the intelligence community has been pretty big. And I'll share this because it's kind of germane to the conversation, and that's fentanyl. So this particular article is arming munitions with fentanyl. But the fact of the matter is that somebody could go to the top of the Empire State Building with a bucket of fentanyl and dump it over the edge and kill tens of thousands of people in no time, in the blink of an eye. And that's more likely to happen than something like this scenario, which is shown, in Gaza. When it comes to the topic of water, you should have something on hand, and you should have multiple ways to purify and filter it. not the same thing. And that becomes part of that 3-month sustainment plan, right? What else would you add, James, as far as sustainment is concerned?
Besides your water source, food that you're not going to have to replace all the time, stuff that's going to be able to, be packaged, but, it's not going to take up a lot of room and isn't going to be perishable. Everyone's on a health kick these days where, they're going organic and, getting better meat sources and things like that. But, when you're in an emergency situation, MREs are always good. They'll get you through, a period. They don't do wonders for your digestive system, anybody that's ever eaten them, but it will get you through your next situation. So stuff that isn't going to take up a lot of space. I've got probably 3 weeks worth of food in the back of my truck, just in case. People may say that I'm paranoid and it's overkill, but I'd rather have it and not need it rather than need it and not have it. That's the idea that I think your listeners are going to go through, is war game it out. Don't be overly paranoid about it, but it's one of those things that if you've got it in place, you're going to be in a better situation if the shit goes down.
I'm Jason Salyer with Survival Dispatch. As a Survival Dispatch insider, you'll be able to gain the knowledge, the skills, and equipment necessary to protect your family when it really, really matters. They'll provide crucial information on such things as stockpiling food, medical necessities, communication plans. You will receive specific actionable plans. Visit survivaldispatch.com to get started.
So from the 10,000 foot view, we've established two things. We have terror cells, sleeper cells in America. Number one. Number two, probably the best course of action is to ensure that you have several months worth of food and water to sustain yourself. But let's zoom in a little bit here. James, we discussed the music rave in Israel and how people tried to escape in their vehicles, and they were stopped by an individual from Hamas posing as a cop, and they trusted that person. They stopped, and then Hamas came at them from the sides and the back and slaughtered everybody. This is a common tactic in the Middle East, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And, some of your listeners may say, well, it's easy to look at things afterwards. We're looking at in the aftermath, and it's easy to sort of poke holes in what people were doing. Yeah, you're right. But I mean, if we're talking about it, we're making people aware of it now. Hey, as I said on one of your previous podcasts, Chris, cops aren't going to stop you from leaving a site, a scene, if there's something like that going down. They want you out of there as far away as possible.
Unless they're crooked SOBs in Maui.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the cops are going to want to get you out of there as fast as possible. So if an officer is stopping you from leaving a site where there's mayhem going down, obviously they're not there for your welfare, and they don't have the best of intentions for you. So, if they're blocking the road and you're in a vehicle, they'll either get out of the way or they're not going to be stopping you from leaving again.
So the reason that I steered the conversation in this direction is, okay, so you have this stockpile. You've got 3 months worth of sustainment for yourself and your family. But much like 9/11, attacks will most likely occur during morning or evening rush hour to inflict the maximum amount of damage. So the reason I wanted to pivot the conversation, that we mentioned this as far as terrorists posing as first responders, you have to have a plan to get home. How do you get home from work if the roads are collapsed? They've set fires that have physically damaged the roads and they've collapsed. The roads are plugged. Let's say the electric grid's down, you can't get fuel and you're not diligent with regards to keeping your fuel tank filled up. How do you get home? How do you plan to get home? What are your thoughts on that, Sal?
So I come back to, this is a plan we should have always had in place. This is now just an enhanced terror threat where we should think about it even more. Part of being prepared is having a get home plan. And that plan changes determined by how far away from home you actually are. What is the nature of the terrain? What is the nature of the population around it, etc. So, for example, most American commuters who are in the office are usually within an hour drive of the home, but bear in mind that may be quite a distance, an hour drive. There's many what they call super commuters who are driving 2 hours, and now you're talking about a distance of well over 100 miles. So if you have to hit the bricks on foot to get home, do you have in that vehicle what you need for that? And, I would start with a change of seasonably appropriate, the right shoes to be walking in, the right clothes to be walking in, enough sustainment in a bag, and certainly the weaponry you need to make it home. So this is just another reason why we should be thinking about that. It could be a natural disaster that puts you on foot getting home, but a terror threat is every bit as capable, if not more so, of doing exactly that. You may simply not be able to drive, so you need to plan to have what you need to sustain on foot. And the distance and the climate, the time of year, et cetera, is all going to factor very heavily into what you actually need.
The last stat that I saw on this says the average American works 15 miles from home. If you don't have to be in super exceptional shape to walk 15 miles, although you may face a lot of danger in an SHTF situation like this. So let's just amp it up a little bit more, James. So you're at work, not you travel extensively, but your average person is 15 miles from home and they've got to get back to their family, but the internet's down, the cell phone network's down, all comms are down. What contingencies can people have that have families? If it's an individual person, then that's one thing. But let's say your children are at school and your wife is at work, your dogs are at home and you're at work and there's no comms. What's the plan?
It comes down to how you're going to war game it out. I mean, if you've got a family, make sure that they know what to do when the shit goes down. I mean, just continuing on to what Sal was saying, I've got a mate who's very, very prepared, and he's got a small foldable electric bike that he keeps in the back of his truck, just as, that's his next stage of transportation. Okay, if something goes down, his truck doesn't work, runs out of gas, whatever, he can get an extra 100 miles on that electric bike.
I got to add something right now proactively. So they're going to be keyboard commandos who say that that's a shitty plan because an EMP will negate that as an option. And we want to make this crystal clear. We have members on our team here at Survival Dispatch who've been in intelligence agencies and various capacities of war. The prospect of an EMP taking out the entire country is slim to none. And in most cases, unless you're at ground zero and you're even on the periphery, it's a matter of resetting a device and it's going to be just fine. So not electing to choose something like an electric bike, an e-bike, because of this imaginary prospect that the whole country is going to be knocked out by EMP is bullshit.
Yep.
You could get hit walking across the street. So you're not going to walk across the street. It's just, we see it repeatedly that for some reason people want to attack e-bikes. And here's the fact of the matter. 17% of Americans go to gyms, work out, exercise. That number doesn't change. It's been like that since the 80s. Okay. So that leaves 83%. Well, out of that 83%, over half of those people are obese, clinically obese, and the other half are overweight. So those people face special challenges getting home. If I'm overweight and I'm obese and I live 15 miles from where my work is, and I have the option of getting an e-bike, like you said, a foldable one, you can put in the back of your vehicle, put it under your desk. We know people who keep them in their cubicles at work, for crying out loud. I'm getting the e-bike to try and get my ass home, and screw the fear over, oh my God, we could have an EMP. Yeah, you know what? You have an EMP, you turn it off, you turn it back on, you're good to go. So sorry.
Yeah, but also, I mean, there's cost-effective EMP shieldings now. So yeah, great. Okay, there may be an EMP. There's cost-effective EMP shields now. So if you are paranoid about that, fine, get an EMP shielding for it. Wrap it up in it, okay, put it inside, whatever.
So I wasn't planning on going down that road. We work with a company called Switch It Up LED, and a lot of what they do is on protecting electrical devices. They're partnered up with Energy, which we love Energy's power stations. Energy, in turn, is partnered up with EMP Shield. We'll give them a shout out here. So this is essentially a shunt. It reacts within 500 trillionths of a second. It's not a surge protector. In other words, it just says, hey, don't ground through me. Go ground over there instead. This has some Anderson connectors. This goes between solar panels and your inverter, for example. So that's how you protect solar panels. These have passed multiple DoD tests as well, because I know the pundits are going to say, yeah, that's bullshit. That won't work. Well, you know what? The military deploys these things. So this particular product then plugs into your battery on the front side of your inverter for your power station, everything plugged into this is EMP protected as well. So if your electric bike is plugged into this, charging, protected, and that's in the home. But let's talk in the vehicle. So this is meant for 12-volt systems, okay? And so is this one. So this would be something that you could put on an RV. This is something that you put on your car. So if your e-bike is plugged in, like your friend James, he's got it in the back and he has it plugged into the vehicle, this will protect from most EMP threats, if not all of them, unless you're ground zero. And in that case, you're incinerated anyway, right? And then as far as your far as, say, your home is concerned, this is another device. You don't even have to have solar panels. You don't have to have a battery backup. You can put this in between your panel and everything you're feeding in your house. It'll do the same thing, 500 trillionths of a second, shunts the pulse elsewhere, and your shit's protected. So again, I wasn't planning on giving them a shout out, but there are devices. They're not that expensive, $300 to $500. They're not hard to install for anybody who has, a DIY knack at all. So sorry to hijack that, but this is one of those topics where we see a lot of pundits come out of the woodwork and say, that's stupid. EMP is going to take everything out. There's nothing can protect you from EMPs. You shouldn't buy e-bikes, blah, blah. Okay, well, we just sit around with our thumb up our ass then and do nothing. That sounds like a good plan to me, right? So
you got to have options.
Yeah, the truth is with the EMP threat, I think, it got a lot of traction with the excellent book called 1 Second After, which I encourage everybody who's into preparedness to read. That was written by an author named William Fortune, who was a military intelligence and analyst guy. But I've heard from multiple engineers that even modern vehicles are so well shielded that unless you were very directly in ground zero of an EMP pulse, it's not going to take out the vehicle. So I think our worry about it absolutely taking out all transportation is overblown. The power grid itself is much more susceptible to it, but vehicles, again, unless you were in exceedingly close proximity, it's probably not going to disable vehicles, which in that book, worst case scenario, all transportation was grounded, etc. So again, I highly advise reading the book because he goes into so much detail about the catastrophe of losing the power grid, but as far as affecting vehicles, it's a bit overblown. And to your point, if we always worry about the absolute worst case scenario, that can help us to prepare for the better case scenarios. But if we go there, then, we're going to abandon all of these things that, 999 times out of 1,000, the emergency won't be an EMP, right? If it's germane to what we're talking about here, a terror threat that shuts down transportation, and it doesn't involve an EMP, well, you're going to sacrifice something that can be of great benefit to you, like an e-bike and getting home, So we have to stay realistic about these things.
This all ties back to a report that Congress commissioned 2003-2004 timeframe that wasn't worth the paper that it was written on. It sowed all kinds of fear, but it was unsubstantiated fear. And then people have taken that and run with it. And they've said, well, I've read, everything's going to go down the shitter. The fact of the matter is the EMP is not a big concern, but the power grid is a huge concern. And I've said this many times. We're a first world country with a third world power grid, and we have 3 grids in America. So East, West, and Texas. There are contingencies to connect those 3 grids. Generally speaking, they're completely isolated from each other. When there was a power shortage in California last year, Texas connected to the Western grid and sent some power that direction, but then they disconnected again. Here's the scary part is there are 12 substations in the entire country that if you take them out, you take out the entire grid. You take all 3 grids down, and it's not that hard to do. So we already know that there have been multiple network attacks, many of them led by Iran, that it wouldn't take much to knock out a specific area. Number 2, we average over 20 physical attacks per year on our substations. So if you look at the transformers and the big buckets, they're full of oil that cools the transformers. It's 1/8 of an inch thick sheet metal. You don't even need, 62 grain M855 ammo to go through it. Any ammo is going to go through it. It's an 18-month lead time to get those transformers. Most of them are made in Korea and Germany primarily. So you order one today, going to come across on a container. They're going to pick it up from the container with a crane. They're going to stick it on a rail car. The rail cars typically, the railways, I should say, are very close to where the substations are on purpose so that the crane can pick them up and set them down. It's much more likely there'll be a logical attack, which is across the network, and or a physical attack that takes our power grid down. It's not the EMP. It's the other aspects to that. So taking out our power is not incredibly difficult. Number one. Number two, it's infrastructure that's similar to our water. We don't have tremendous security over our water supply. So that's why I mentioned it early. So sorry to take us down that rabbit hole there, but the reality is EMP is not the threat. Physical attacks on our power grid and on our water supplies that are a much bigger concern. So let me just recap once again. So we know we have sleeper cells. Having 3 months worth of sustainment in your home is kind of a minimum. Having a plan that's been coordinated and communicated to the entire family on how to get home, because this will likely happen during work hours, is critical. I would add another piece of this, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is that, you can have the best plans in the world, but it's probably not going to unfold the way that you've planned for. So you have to be mentally and emotionally committed to being able to pivot on a dime. So you should have multiple contingencies. So James, your guy with an e-bike, for example, here's a scenario. He's at work. We suffer a terrorist attack. The roads are crippled. He needs to get home. He goes to get on his e-bike and looks in the back of his truck and somebody stole it. What's the contingency for him to get home?
Well, as Sal was saying, decent socks, decent shoes, decent attire, and start hoofing it. I mean, that's all you can do. You've got to get to the next place.
Okay, so I knew what you were going to say there. I did that on purpose. It was almost a rhetorical question, and Sal hit on it as well. Anybody who's walked any significant distance, especially with a pack on their back, will tell you that your feet are your worst enemy. It doesn't take much to take your feet out. Heat blisters, those sort of things, especially people who are diabetic, will shut you down faster than anything. So having good footwear, Sal pointed out, change of socks. James, you've been in multiple theaters of war. What's a clean pair of socks worth to you in that scenario?
Yeah, well, it's funny, after you've been hoofing it for a while and you change your socks, you feel like a new man. It's just, you run the risk, particularly, in an AO, you run the risk of, while you're changing out your socks, if things kick off, okay, yeah, it's a risk, but it does definitely save your feet. You feel like a brand new man. Yeah, decent socks, and making sure that you've got ventilation to your feet. And I'm not saying cut a hole in the side of your boots, but make sure that your shoes are really for walking long distances and a different terrain too, because you're not only going to be on the tarmac, you may have to go above different topography.
I wish I could remember the gentleman's name, but there's another laptop sitting right there that runs my 3D printer, my Ghost Gunner, and my TV. And it'll sit on YouTube, and I'll refresh the homepage and something will catch my eye and I'll let it play in the background while I'm working. And so this gentleman, I believe he was mid-40s. He, by his own account, 100 pounds overweight, and he wanted to see if he could walk home. And it was 20 some odd miles. And it was a very small channel, only a few hundred followers. God bless him for trying to walk home. So he fashioned his get home bag based on the fact that he was going to attempt to do this in one day, which really at 2 miles an hour, which is pretty slow, you should be able to make it home in a reasonable amount of time, 10, 12, 14 hours. He almost got home, but he had to stop because he got blisters on his feet. He was done. And if the blisters didn't get him, his thighs would have got him from being overweight and rubbing together. So he was a big fan of
Gold Bond powder.
Gold Bond powder. That's it. Thank you. I don't have Alzheimer's, but I got Sometimes. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I forget. That's it. Gold Bond. So he did a recap at the end of it. And he said that he felt his feet going and he ignored it and didn't stop and change his socks and use some of the powder, and it stopped him dead in his tracks from getting home. So my point is this, is that contingency wise, your guys' plan, James, is excellent. Have an e-bike to get home, but something happens to the e-bike. Okay, we got to go to plan B, and now we're on the Ankle Express. Do you have some extra socks? Do you have some Gold Bond powder? Have you ever walked that far before? Have you even tried to do that? So we don't beat people up over exercise and conditioning and diet and stuff like that. It's a personal decision. And, anybody in our community does harp on about that. Usually their content tanks. So it may be the number one prep, but it's also the number one prep that's ignored. Sal, what are your thoughts on contingencies of getting home?
Yeah, absolutely. So the worst case contingency is on foot, right? There's no doubt about that. If we have any sort of transportation, it's going to make that much better. The foot issue is a big one. I also like moleskin, those moleskin patches, because they're very soft. That can cover a blister that's forming, that's kind of thing. I always keep those in my get home bag. Here's another fantastic option I would throw out, and I learned this over decades of hunting deer in very cold climates, and that is you may have, if you're in the winter months in a cold climate, then obviously you may be walking home during a very cold snap, right? If you have the heavy, I suggest having heavy outer pants, quilted outer pants of some kind, and a heavy jacket, obviously, dress in layers. But one thing I really urge people to do, and it doesn't take much room or space, is have an extra base layer of thermals, a top, a bottom, and of course the extra socks. Because when you're moving in the extreme cold, guaranteed you're going to sweat up. And when you have to stop, that sweat is your enemy, because now you're wet in your body core in that cold, right? And the outer layers are not a big deal. Even if they get wet, they'll dry off, etc. But that underlayer, if you have a spare underlayer, you can very quickly change into that spare underlayer if you have to stop or if you have to slow down. And while you're walking, the other layer can be drying off. So that's a thing I learned spending many, many days in very cold climate on mountainsides hunting. And I do the same thing with my get home bag. I don't have extra coats or anything like that. You'll only need the one for the outer layer, but that extra underlayer, and you can wad that whole thing up in, a sealed bag about this big and have in that pack with you.
That's an awesome
point. Just to extend on that, sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but I mean, with walking long distances like this, I mean, shin splints is also a thing as well. But, with what Sal is saying, having that base layer, it can also help you to make sure that base layer is some sort of like an Under Armour compression thing. That's going to save you. It's also going to assist with you getting to the next place because you've got that extra layer of protection. That was just something that I thought of on what Sal was saying.
Let's throw another curveball in here, and I touched on it earlier, but I'd like to get your thoughts. You have children and they're in school. How do you get from work to get your children to get home? Does your school or school board, what is their contingency plan for something like this? Do they just go into lockdown? What happens if the school's being attacked and a lockdown is just not the case? What happens if these terrorists, their goal was to attack the schools, and at the end of the day, they might have some fire suppression, but if you want to get somebody out of a building, set it on fire. Sal, what are your thoughts on this? How do you have contingencies to get your kids?
So that's a plan you need to have with your significant other, and whoever is closer to home, which is most likely going to be closer to the school, is probably going to be the person, hey, if anything kicks off, whatever that is, we see something bad happen on the news, whether it's an attack like the focus of this discussion, or natural disasters, could be anything. We're leaving as soon as we know that. Doesn't matter how important the next board meeting in the office or whatever is, we're out of here. And the person who's closest to home, their game plan should be immediately go to that school. If you might have kids spread out. Maybe you have a kid in a daycare and another kid at the school, etc. So work that out. Who's closer to who, right? If the daycare is on your way home, then that's your stop, your immediate stop on your way home. And, hopefully you're driving. If you're hoofing it on foot, it still may not change. Then whoever's closer to who is going to get that kid first and head home. Another thing I would throw out about the communications, if the grid goes down with the cell towers, and you can't make a call, the next thing to try is sending a text, because the text packets use so much less data, very often the text will get through, even if it seems that no other data is getting through. Now, if it's a complete, if the system's completely down, nothing will go through. But that has been experienced in this country a number of times, even after 9/11. Of course, this is 20 plus years ago that the cell tower network was nothing like it is now. It was much more limited, but at that time, even calls would not make it through, yet people were able to get texts through. So, that would be your next resort. Hey, something happened. Obviously, the network is down. I can't get a call through. Send that text, and hopefully those can, in the meantime, pass through. But you have to go under the worst case assumption. There's no communication. Have the plan beforehand. Who is going to where? Who's going to the school? Who's going to the daycare? And we'll all meet at home.
There are three distinctions with regards to network. So you may recall that I come from high tech. So voice, SMS, simple messaging service, and data are not the same thing. And so they're actually three networks in one. So good advice, Sal, because if you can't make a voice transmission, maybe you can get an SMS transmission, which is a simple text. But if that's down, maybe the internet's still up. And if the internet is still up, then you can send data packets. If you have an iPhone, you can send an iMessage. If you don't have an iPhone, you can use other apps. I don't really like to recommend any of them other than Signal. Signal's encrypted, but WhatsApp are available. A lot of spine, a lot of data collection there. James, what are your thoughts on having contingencies to get other family members, especially kids, on the way home? Is there anything you can think of that you could be proactive, kind of have in the back of your mind?
Well, it depends. I mean, a lot of your listeners are in different areas of America, and different areas of America have different ideas. They have different values and whatnot. And, your kids could be in a school where, they're not, how do I put it? They're not our people. Okay. And they're going to, they're going to restrict, they're going to make decisions for your kids, you aren't going to like. And yeah, exactly. And, communication and teaching your kids, I think, and, I probably shouldn't be the authority on this, not having any kids myself, but, communicating with them and getting prepared, and then letting them know, okay, well, this is our plan as a family. This is not to be common knowledge. Okay. Because, if shit really goes down and goes bad, it's going to be bedlam. There's going to be people latching on to everybody. There's going to be, people stealing from other people. Just to try and get them, because they may not have prepared as well as you. So, having the plan in place, but also communicating to your kids that this is the family plan. Okay. You're not to let anybody else know this. Okay. And then, reassess it. You sort of alluded to, having finding out what the plan is for the school. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're in an area where they don't like these sorts of conversations, they don't like these sorts of things, if you are the sort of person to say, okay, well, something goes down, what's your plan? Just asking that question could create a different set of problems for 100%. You. Okay, so just assess on where you are in the country, and, if your kids are at a certain school, are they our people or are they not? If they're not, well, keep a lid on it. If they are, find out what that, it comes down to the different situation. I think you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, 100%. So let's wrap up on this. Let's get your thoughts. Sal, you can start, but gray man principles, not standing out like a sore thumb and getting home.
Yeah, certainly. The gray man principle is to blend into the baseline of what is normal in the environment, not to draw undue attention to yourself. Obviously, where that's going to really factor in is if you are in ground zero of an attack, okay, and the focus of this conversation, if we're looking at terror attacks, which might involve active shooters, active killers of some kind, you don't want to be significant in the crowd to the point where they take you out first, right? Being the guy wearing the Glock cap and all of that kind of thing, that they know what they're looking at.
Brandishing a weapon.
Right. That they're going to eliminate you first, so there's no one to interfere with their plan. And it also factors into these discussions on making it home, right? You don't want to be walking and looking like a guy who is well supplied, right? For example, I like low profile packs. I don't like military looking packs with Molly on them. I want something that looks low profile. I'm not going to dress all in camo. Now that might change if you are specifically trekking home through the outdoor wilderness, it's different, right? But most people, it's going to be like a suburban environment, right? I want to look like just Joe Suburbia walking through that environment and not draw undue attention to myself.
I appreciate that. James?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sal said it best. I mean, you know, I'm 6'2" and 270. It's hard for me to blend into a crowd. Okay.
Right.
And I look the way that I look, but if you can, there's always ways that you can minimize how you look. And, you know, by not having, you know, one of the 511 packs that's got all the multicam all over it and going for something that's more understated would be a good way to go, I reckon.
Yeah, and on that particular topic, I'd recommend that our audience have a look at the ballista pack from Byrna. It looks like a kid's school bag. It's gray. It has nothing tactical as far as appearance is concerned, but you can put 2 body panels in it with a quick deploy over your head. If I had kids in a school today, which I wouldn't because they're indoctrination camps, but if I did, they'd all have ballista packs with 3A panels in them. And we've got some video of Denny where he reached over his head, deployed the front panel. So there's 2 panels, one that stays in the back, one that comes forward. It's got Molly on the front. He had a Byrna launcher, but you could have a regular pistol. Pull the pistol from the holster, put a shot on target on the silhouette target. It was well under 3 seconds, maybe 2.5 seconds from the time he deployed the pit. Now, he's a professional. He's a national champion in shooting. But point being is nobody would look at that backpack and think it's anything but a kid's book bag. Doesn't stand out whatsoever. Anything else you guys want to add before we call it a day?
I would revisit one thing, what you mentioned about the terrorist acts that have impersonated law enforcement. So while we have not seen that directly related to terrorism in our country, we've seen it numerous times with home invasions and other just more typical crime. So, you know, to be on the lookout for that, they almost never get it completely right. Like there's always something off with the coordination of the outfits, etc. So if things look fishy to you, it's probably a pretty good bet that's not legitimate law enforcement. And as was mentioned before, you know, if they're doing something that doesn't make sense, like trying to block your ability to flee a scene, you have to put those things together and act accordingly.
That's funny because there was a video came up yesterday on my second laptop there for active self-protection, John Correa. And it was a video of the cops arresting a guy who was posing as a cop and pulling other people over. And his footwear gave him away. And there was something else. I think it was with regards to his badge was clearly a fake badge, but that's a good point that there'd be some sort of tell that they didn't quite get right.
Just before we go, mate, just any continuation of this, sorry to cut you off, but, you know, just with the threat that's coming over the border, I think a good follow-on to this would be a mate of mine, Sheriff Mark Lamb. He's touching on him. He's going for a seat in the Senate, but he's really at ground zero on the Arizona border. And he's nature's gentleman, really, really good bloke. I wouldn't be surprised if our circles hadn't crossed before, but just as a continuation of this on the threats that are coming over the border and getting some actual perspective and numbers may be a good follow-up. I'll provide that introduction for you if you don't already know him.
That would be awesome. America's Sheriff Lamb. I do not know him, but we certainly have a bunch of mutual connections like Don Mann and Dr. Jennifer Stankus and the principals at American Stories Entertainment, who he has a couple shows with them. That would be awesome, James. That would be very much appreciated. All right. Once again, appreciate y'all's time. Stay safe, stay strapped.
I'm Jason Salyer with Survival Dispatch, and when disaster strikes, will you be ready? Power outages, natural disasters, economic collapse, and the knowledge, the skills, and equipment necessary to protect your family when it really, really matters. You can gain instant access to our team of survival experts, stockpiling food, medical necessities, communication plans, proven techniques to help you get home, shelter in place, or bug out safely. Don't leave your family's safety to chance. Visit survivaldispatch.com to get started.